Here's a double standard that I wish that we didn't have. I'm a communist, which means that when I have political conversations, I have to tell you exactly what I would do if I were president of the entire world and how I would solve everyone's problems, including your grandmother's. But if you are a capitalist, oh, sorry, my bad. Most of us aren't capitalists because most of us don't own capital. But let's say that you support capitalism. Why don't you have to defend capitalism? Why am I always put on the spot of like, defend your entire ideology? Defend yours. Like what? Are you going to tell me that we have choice? What, you mean this? Are you going to tell me that we're free? What, you mean that we have 20% of the world's prison population while only having 5% of the world's actual population? What, are you going to tell me that we're free because we have democracy? Sweetie, we don't even have democracy in the workplace. Capitalism has a hierarchical economic structure. There's one person at the top that decides for all us people at the bottom. Like, defend your system. Sell it to me, because I'm not sold and I've been living under it.
So this TikTok by Petite Leah makes an excellent point, and there's a few different layers to go from here. The first layer being that most people actually don't even understand what socialism or communism is, so I'll give you the really quick rundown. Socialism is defined by a system where the state serves the interests of the working class while suppressing the interests of the capital class. Fundamentally at its core, that is the heart of socialism. Socialism is a process to achieve an eventual state of communist. So if somebody says that they are a communist or a socialist, these things are effectively interchangeable. Because once again, socialism is a process of achieving communism. Communism being a moneyless, classless, stateless society. But there are obviously like different elements that socialists tend to believe in, like things like nationalizing huge chunks of the economy, democratizing the workplace, basically making sure that not only are different political functions under the control of democracy, but also making sure that the economy itself is also under democratic control. But that's really the heart of it. And I think most people wouldn't even disagree with this. And that's, I think, why people demand like meticulous micromanagement from anybody that calls himself a socialist. Because if they just say generally that they're against a democratized economy and a system where the workers' interests are supported by the government, while the interests of wealthy capitalists are suppressed by the government, I think the overwhelming majority of people would be vehemently in support of that. But no, a lot of people have this ridiculous idea of socialism or communism, and they're like, oh, authoritarianism and all these terrible things. But all of that fear-mongering really just exists to get you to not ask the real question, which is, why capitalism? I mean, a lot of wealthy capitalists will say that capitalism has lifted people out of poverty, but that's actually not true. It was actually never true. Even if you go back to the feudal era, if you actually look at the conditions of working class people, feudal peasants quite literally had more vacation time and more day-to-day freedom than your average worker under capitalist society. And even though places in like Western Europe and the United States have seen increased life expectancy and things like that, global poverty has actually increased substantially. And in fact, capitalism not only had its birth in a systems of obviously colonialism and slavery, but to this very day, capitalism is not doing anything to lift working class people around the world out of poverty. Now, on the whole, global poverty has been reduced over the past few decades, but all of that reduction in poverty is almost entirely attributable to one country, that country being China, a country that is very much a socialist country. And now, at this point, you might be thinking about all the different things that China does that you might disagree with, but the reality is that socialism is meant to be democratic. And in a democracy, people will have to make collective decisions over long periods of time. It doesn't mean that everything is magically gonna be perfect overnight. It means that there's a long process of improving conditions over time. And yeah, even in democracies, people will disagree with each other and might go with one policy or another. That's why it's so ridiculous to ask any communist what they would do in every single possible situation, because the reality is that you would have some type of system where the community as a whole would be making decisions in various ways. And that is why socialist countries often look very different from each other in a lot of different ways. Vietnam is very different than China and is very different from Cuba. All three are socialist countries that have different material conditions, different cultures, and thus they will obviously come to different conclusions about different situations that their countries are dealing with. But the thing that's the same between those three countries is that all of them have homeownership rates that hover around 90%, which means that regular working class folks actually see a real material benefit from any economic gains that the country as a whole sees. So really, at the end of the day, the question should be, why do you think the economy shouldn't be democratized? Why do you think democratic systems shouldn't have control over economic system? And I think at that point, the answer that these capitalists have becomes really clear, because they want a bunch of wealthy individuals, more specifically themselves, to stay wealthy and continue to have power over other people.